Live now.
Thanks, Robin. Morena, everyone. Welcome to our Climate and Environment Committee meeting via Zoom. It's good to see you all. I can see most of your faces, and some of you I know are just listening and will raise your hand if you want to speak. I'm going to start with our karakia. Do we all want to give it? No, I'll just give it today. I'm going to do tuia. So tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho, tui te here tangata, ka ronga te pau, ka ronga te ao, humiae, huiae, taikie. It's a beautiful day in Nelson, and we had a really good briefing session this morning on our proposed plan change for housing. So that item's coming up in the agenda as well today. So thanks all the councillors who attended that and contributed so well. It was a really great workshop, actually. Today, I just want to remind everyone that we're on Zoom. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Ideally, if you have your camera on when you're speaking, and ideally if you have your camera on when you're voting, that's really helpful. But I know some of you can't, and if you want to just listen and use the reaction buttons as well, that's absolutely fine. So we'll be voting using the green tick or the red cross today, and we're live streaming even during our breaks. So when you're taking a break, maybe turn your cameras off. I'll be aiming to have a 10-minute break every hour. And if you leave the meeting, please let the GAs know. I know a couple of you have to leave for sort of 10-20 minutes. Just let the GAs know, and then they can note that you weren't in attendance for that part of the meeting as well. I have apologies today from Councillor Noonan and Councillor Bowater. Councillor Bowater has contacted me and said she might listen in for some of the meeting, in which case she'll be recorded as present for those parts, but we will move that the apologies for Councillor Noonan and Councillor Bowater be accepted. I'll move that. Can I have a seconder? Mel, do you want to second? Thanks. Oh, yeah, Mel. Thank you, Mel. All those in favour? Just got to do my own reaction button. Thank you. That's carried. Judine, I can't see that you've voted, but maybe you have already.
I've literally just joined the meeting. Apologies, I was at another meeting, so I don't know what we're voting on. So
okay, we're just voting that we're voting to accept the apologies from Councillor Noonan and Councillor Bowater.
Oh, okay, well that's easy. I can vote on that.
Yeah. Moving on, thanks, Judine. Nice to see you. Welcome. Just want to confirm the order of business. As I think we're just moving through the agenda in the order that it is, and at the end of the meeting, we will switch over to Mel will be chairing the meeting, which was supposed to happen on the 24th of March to deliberate on the submissions for the Urban Environments Bylaw review. So Mel will take over and chair that section. We'll have a break before so we can change over. Interests, I'm sure people have got their interests updated. If anyone needs to declare interest, now would be a good time to. And I just wanted to welcome, we have Amy Clark and Isla Kennard, youth councillors at our meeting. Welcome, Amy and Isla. Is it Isla? How do I say your name?
It's Isla.
Isla, I'm sorry, apology.
No worries.
Isla and Amy, welcome both of you. Do you want to just introduce yourselves briefly, tell us which schools you're from, and welcome to our, how many youth council meetings you've been to before, maybe?
I'm Amy, I go to Garran, I'm a year 12, and this is my second council meeting I've attended, so yeah, I'm excited.
Great.
I'm Isla, I go to girls college, I'm year 13, and I think this is my 5th or 6th council meeting. I'm not too sure. I've lost count.
Okay. Well, you guys are looking very relaxed, not in school uniform, which is nice. So yeah, it is a plus of. Are you at school at the moment? Like you're back in school at the moment? No, you're working from home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to now go to public forum. We have Robert Scheiderwinkle from the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary. He is going to speak to us on the urban environment bylaw, which Mel will be chairing that part of the meeting later, but we'll hear from Robert now. Welcome, Robert. I'm not sure if you're in the room already. Is he here, Robin?
He's joining the meeting now.
Okay.
He's in.
I'm just looking for him. Welcome, Robert. It's nice that you've been able to join us today. I understand you're going to speak to us on behalf of the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary Trust, and you're going to be speaking on the Urban Environments Bylaw adoption. I think you have 10 minutes to speak.
All right.
Well, 10 minutes to speak and answer questions.
Sure. I'm a bit dark. Hope that doesn't bother too many people. It must be the bright sun, Nelson sunshine that makes my face really dark here on my screen. Yes. Hi. Welcome. Yeah. Thanks for letting me speak at this forum. I'm pleased to talk about the item 5 on the urban bylaw adoption. The point about cat management. So I get straight into it. I have only little time. What I like to say is like the discussion around cat management and also the control of cats is often misguided and sometimes even factually wrong, but it's definitely always a very emotional topic. So the proposed or the proposal that was made by some submitters was to do compulsory microchipping and desexing. And I think how this is largely a non-controversial topic for cat owners as well, as any or all responsible cat owners are doing this already anyhow. And I've just read earlier this morning the Spca submission, which basically put a bit of data and that behind it. So I was quite good to see. Desexing will help to stop the flow of dumped kittens, creating new stray cat colonies. So it's a preventive measure. And microchipping helps with identifying ownership and returning animals to their owners when work needs to be undertaken to, for example, to remove a stray cat colony. So at the moment, dealing with any stray cat colonies is very difficult. It's a minefield, actually, because trapping a stray cat, even with the aim to rehome it through the Spca process, cannot really be done very easily, because often it is not quite clear whether this animal is owned or not. And that sounds quite straightforward. There's a stray cat colony, these animals are not owned. But with the Spca and their regulations, they actually have to double check these. And there's a long holding period and an advertising period for these animals to be put up before they can actually rehome. So the process is unnecessarily long and complicated. And I just like to talk about a concrete example of how this affects us at the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary. As you know, we are adjacent or at the top of the Brook Valley Holiday Park, and there's currently a growing stray cat colony there. And I'd just like to talk about how it affects us and how these simple two potential bylaw additions, such as the microchipping and desexing I'm talking about, could help us, for example, to deal with this stray cat colony in our situation. So for us, it's not the presence of a few cats, whether they are owned, stray, feral, that is a threat to the sanctuary. It is a well-fed stray cat colony, which can grow very quickly and reach very unnatural and natural high densities of animals, as since these cats are fed And so there's no really natural limit for them, that keeps them in check. We do have feral cats present around the fence, for example, and there will be the odd cat that is owned, that one is up to the fence. But that is not really a problem. We have a lot of other pests around the fence as well, and we deal with it. But when it becomes a problem is when we have a stray cat colony that's just a large number of cats, and it's just when it becomes a problem. So it is a bit of a density related problem. So a lot of cats, dense cat colonies, dense number of cats near the sanctuary is when it becomes a threat. One is, of course, a biosecurity threat. If you get, dozens or maybe eventually 100 cats, but one of them will manage to get into the fence, over the fence is, of course, larger than when you just have 2 or 3 cats lingering around. The other thing is we have critically endangered species in the sanctuary now, teaki and the orange-fronted parakeet. So a bird that jumps over the fence, which they do, and for foraging or whatever, is then a higher threat to being caught by a cat when you have dozens of cats present versus just a handful, like 2 or 3 around the same area. So this is the problem that we are facing. The other problem is the perception, of course, that visitors have when they're driving past a visible stray cat colony through the Brook Holiday Park en route to the Brook Waimara Sanctuary. So we get comments on that, why that is the case. And we are, that's what I'm going to say, we are working on removing this cat colony and managing this cat colony in conjunction with the Spca, helping vet, and also, of course, the Nelson City Council, though we are limited of what we can do. And these limitations are a result of identifying the cats, are they owned or not, are they not owned, and of course, with if desexing would be mandatory for owned cats, we probably wouldn't have a stray cat colony in the first place. So really, I think there's a lot of benefits of adopting desexing and microchipping as part of the urban bylaw, and to put this in there. And therefore we urge the council to please do so. And this is just an example for our sanctuary, but I'm sure there's other conservation groups or non-conservation related issues, or organizations who have similar issues and who would be largely assisted by a move to have desexing and microchipping mandated. That's all, really. Just over 5 minutes. How was that?
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I think there's a large portion of the community which share your concerns. It's just figuring out how we make those policies work. So I have questions from Matt and then Judine.
Sorry, can I ask a procedural question before we go to questions?
Yes, you can.
So how is this being treated? Just, we've already had submissions and hearings. And so we've already had the ability for people to speak. And so is this a late submission? Is this an extension to the hearing? How is this legally being treated or procedurally being treated? I just, because we've already closed that part of the hearing process.
I think that's a really good question, Judine. I think I'll let Claire answer that. I didn't attend the hearings, as you know. I had a conference in Wellington, so it might be that it can be treated as a late submission. We often receive late submissions, but I'll let Claire answer that question, and maybe it's up to Mel as the chair to make that decision. Claire?
So through the chair, there hasn't been a submission as part of the process, so my read on that would be that we can't actually consider it. Certainly any members able to come to public forum and raise issues, but in terms of the consideration aspect of it, it's outside of the process.
Okay.
Right. So, yes. Yeah. Okay. So it's a little awkward then, with apologies. It wasn't on the agenda, so I couldn't have raised questions sooner, or not on mine. So, I mean, so can we do a process of questioning then? Because does that then be seen to influence deliberations this afternoon? I'm sorry, I'm not sure quite what we're doing?
I suggest we stick to this as being a public forum about the issue around feral cats in the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary, and therefore you can just treat it like a public forum item and ask questions around how we could support the brook with their biodiversity restoration vision.
Okay. Yep.
And then yeah.
through the
I think
chair,
individually you're going to have to make a choice to that when you come to deliberations.
if I can just also through the chair, this wasn't something that we specifically consulted on, so inclusion of it at this point is also passed.
Yeah, lovely.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification. And yeah, thank you, Kate. I think that's a good way forward. Cheers. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair.
No, you can just call me Kate today. That's all good. We're going to use first names today. Thank you. I should have said that at the start of the meeting. Matt?
Thanks, Kate. And Robert, congratulations on the way you've presented yourself on Zoom. I think it's going to make it much harder for serious cat fans to identify you. Very smart move. Well done. But seriously, as things are proposed, we don't have a limit on the number of cats that people can have at a residential property in Nelson Whakatū. And we don't have a limit on the number of cats that people can own in properties really near the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary. We have a limit on the number of dogs that people can own. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the number, so that's why I mentioned in the beginning that microchip and desexing is, I think, a largely non-controversial topic. I think once you get into, that's my personal opinion, once you get into the discussion of what is the maximum number of animals one can have, and I think it probably comes a bit more emotional and more controversial. And also, I think how much is it a problem that people have 20 cats? I don't think in reality I don't know anyone who has got more than 2 or 3 cats. So I don't really. Is it a real problem? That would be my first question. So if there's no real problem with that, then there's probably no need to act on it.
Okay, but you do think there's a problem when it comes to cats breeding and not being able to be identified?
Yes, because there's a problem with stray cats, of course, because they are fed usually, and so then the numbers can increase a lot. And stray cats are usually not, the feral cats are not as stray. So there's, of course, 3 categories, owned, stray, and feral, as you want. So stray cat, the origin of stray cats is almost exclusively owned cats, or not anymore owned, of course, because they've been dumped. Usually kittens from people that own a cat, have young, they don't know what to do with it, they can't be bothered, they dump them somewhere, and that's when you get stray cats. They're not, feral cats do not become stray cats, they stay feral. So that's why I think desexing owned cats will lead to a reduction of stray cat colonies. So it's as simple as that.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. A question from Rachel Sampson.
No, thanks. My question has been asked and answered. Thanks very much for your presentation, Robert. Really interesting to hear your public forum on this matter. Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. I think that's the end of our public forum item. Thank you so much, Robert, for presenting. And I know that there's some work being done in the non-regulatory space, and all good cat owners should have their cats desexed and microchipped. That's part of the message that we need to get across to people who choose to own a cat. So certainly that's part of that responsibility. And we look forward to maybe the government regulating more on that. I'm going to move on now to confirmation of our minutes, which is pages 9, no, just confirmation of the minutes. Pages 9 to 14 of our agenda. And we have the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, the 15th of February. I'm happy to move those. Do I have someone who can second? I can't see anyone who's put their hand up.
Councillor
Matt,
Pittman.
thank you. Matt has seconded those minutes. Thank you. Are there any questions around the minutes? Any concerns about the content of them? In which case I'll put that those minutes be received. All those in favour, if you can please put your reaction in, and all those against as well. Oh, that's the cool thing, because we can do it at the same time. Thank you. That's passed, and then we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting on Wednesday the 16th of February to hear submissions of the Urban Environment Bylaw review. I didn't attend that meeting, so I might get Mel to move those minutes.
Yes, I'll move those, Kate. Thanks. Yep.
I'm happy to second.
Thanks, Judine. Anyone have any concerns about them? Anyone wish to speak to them? In which case I'll put that the minutes are received. Whoops, I forgot to take my tick. If you take your text box down for a second and then put it back up, that's great. Looks like that's passed. Mel, you haven't, oh great, thanks Mel. Glenys, just looking. Glenys is not, oh, she wasn't there. Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And then we have the minutes of the meeting on, so it's page 18 of our agenda, minutes of the meeting for the Environment and Climate Committee, which was supposed to be held up via Zoom on Thursday the 24th of March at 1 p.m. And Mel, I'll let you move those minutes that where it was resolved that we continue that meeting today. I do note it says 9 a.m.
Happy to do that. Happy to do that, Madam Chair. I'll move.
Thanks. Moved by Mel.
Happy to second again.
Thanks, Judine. Can I just check with the officers that the resolution says 9 a.m. Is there an issue with that? Does that need to be changed, or do we change that when we get to the next meeting?
Through the chair, sorry, can you just clarify what that question was? Was it 9 a.m. in the minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, we can update that.
But that was the resolution.
Confirms the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of March as a true and correct record.
So the resolution on the 24th was that we defer item 5 for the Environment and Climate Committee meeting to be held on 7th of April at 9 a.m. It has the time in it. Does that, how do we address that?
No need to change that. It would have been advertised that the meeting start time had to change, so there will be an audit trail to follow.
Okay, all right, that's great. So because at the time it was advertised at that time. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. That's good to clarify. Okay, so then we're going to move on to our item on the agenda.
Have you put that resolution?
Oh, all those in favour? Sorry, thanks, Judine. Got ahead of myself. If you want to take your tick box down, if you've still got it up, and then put it again. Thank you. That's carried. And then we're going to move on to pages 20, carrying on of our agenda, the housing plan change 29. And I think I have Maxine, Sonia and Mithran here with us at the meeting to speak to this item. As we've already had a workshop on parts of it this morning, I think this is slightly different. This is about the process, but Maxine, I'll let you spend a bit of time explaining why officers have landed where they've landed in terms of the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Just a slight update. I've got Natasha Wilson here with me instead of Sonia and Mithran. Yes, look, I'm going to just take you through the report. I will treat it largely as read, and please bear with me. This is a little bit technical and sort of complex. These are new process options that are available to council that haven't necessarily been available previously. So I will attempt to guide you through it, but please do ask me questions if you don't quite follow. I think the key part of it is, as we're preparing our housing plan change, we need to choose one of a range of options that are available to us in terms of how the plan progresses through its notification, submission, hearing and appeal processes. And we have three main options presented in this report. The first option is the newest option that's been made available through the Resource Management Amendment Act, the Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Act. And that process is called the ISPP, or the Intensification Streamlined Planning process. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. The second option is the Streamlined Planning process, and that option's been available to councils for several years now. And that option is a process that requires us to go through the Ministry for the Environment to notify the process, and the Minister ultimately gets to make a decision on the plan change. The third option is the Schedule 1 process. And a Schedule 1 process is a standard planning process where we notify the plan change, we run through submissions and a hearing. People have the ability to have appeals on that, and we can make any sort of subsequent changes as a result of those appeals. In preparing this report today, this report was prepared, about 6 weeks ago, and during that time we have been having conversations with the Ministry for the Environment about the Streamlined Planning process, which has been our recommendation in this report. And I really needed to provide a bit of an update to you, because some of the conversations that we'd had for the Ministry have affected my information that I included in the report, and I wanted to provide an update around that, particularly around some of the advantages and disadvantages of proceeding, some of the risks, and what that might mean for some of the timelines. So if you wouldn't mind, Tanya or Robin, to pull up a few slides that I would like to table to just help us as we're working through this Zoom process, get a clearer understanding of what I'm talking about. And if you go to the next slide, please. So in the report, I have a table that talks about the advantages and disadvantages, or the pros and cons of going ahead with each of the options. And I'll talk to these in just a moment, but perhaps if I just give you a quick update on what the Ministry for the Environment have said to us. So we've been speaking to them about this Streamlined Planning process. In the conversations, they've given a pretty strong indication that they would like us to go through the new legislation, the intensification pathway, the ISPP, instead of the Streamlined Planning process. They do that because they say that it's less complex and will be much faster for us to go through it. And so in my report, I talk about the ISPP being approximately a sort of 12-month period for notification. They've indicated that they would expect that to get through in something closer to 6 months. And as we go through all of these options, the ultimate question is, the ultimate matters that we're weighing up, or the trade-off, is between how quickly we can move through the plan change process versus how much public input there is, and how much local flavour we can add to the plan changes. So the Ministry have said to us that, of course we can still apply for the SPP process, the Streamlined Planning process, which we had been tracking towards. They did explain that can be a bit more complex than councils had anticipated, because there are two front-end processes that have to go through. One is the approval of the Minister to get involved, to use that process, and then the actual plan change process itself. And then they also said to us that the new ISPP process is being tested by a number of councils to expand the scope of what can be covered. Now, without getting into too much detail, suffice to say, we as a council set of planning officers had looked at the legislation. interpreted what was potentially within scope and not in scope, and concluded that in order for us to produce a plan change that provided a Nelson flavour and was sort of broadly in line with what we had gone out with the draft Nelson plan, that we wouldn't be able to use that ISPP process. What the conversations with the ministry are saying is that there is probably more scope to actually achieve that. And then further conversations with some other councils who are going through this process, the Tier 1 councils who are going through this as a compulsory exercise, have perhaps also added a little bit of more complexity to that and created some uncertainty for us about what is in scope and what's not. It's fair to say that a lot of councils are really testing what that legislation can include in a plan change. And so all of this has happened essentially in the last couple of days prior to this report coming to you. And so as council officers, we really just need to conclude at the moment we don't have a clear view on the scope of what can be included in a plan change through that ISPP process. But we are under a time frame at the moment to get this housing plan change through. So hence, we do still need to kind of make a call about the plan change process if we are to notify this plan change in your term of council. So what I might do is to just talk through some of those advantages and disadvantages, and I'll go along the lines with the ISPP at the top. I've talked about the time frame. I needed to update about the reference in the report to all urban zones being captured through the new ISPP process that would potentially have had the new medium density residential standards. There's a clarification in the Act that you can cut out certain zones, or you can apply certain constraints through qualifying matters. So it's not quite as blanket approach as perhaps had initially been put forward. I've talked about the lack of clarity. One of the disadvantages of potentially using this ISPP process is that up until now, we've been going out and talking to our community through the Nelson plan and draft plan with largely an expectation of following either the standard Schedule 1 process or the Streamline Planning process. And the community hasn't had a chance to really comment on whether or not council should jump into this new intensification Streamline Planning process. And the reason that that's probably a bit more significant than in other times is that if council chooses to go into this Streamline Planning process, then the opportunities for the community to influence the standards that apply and the ability to appeal the provisions is much more limited. In fact, the ability to change the standards would be very limited because the standards are set in the legislation. And the appeal process has been removed, and the advantage of that is that it makes plans have effect, much quicker, and you can achieve some of those outcomes that you're trying to get. The disadvantages is if you get anything wrong or you wanted to go back and subsequently change anything, then you pretty much can't. And because you are only allowed to do this process once, you are largely sort of stuck with the provisions. And I guess as a planner who has been around for a long time, you often actually do want to potentially go and make some tweaks and revisions. So there are some risks around or disadvantages from that approach. The Streamline Planning process, the one where we make an application to the minister and give them the plan change, is front end heavy. It takes from when we put the plan change in to the ministry potentially notifying is at least a sort of 6-month window. The community can still make submissions and can still make changes to the provisions via that submission and hearing process. Again, once the decision has been issued, there isn't an appeal process, and so we have difficulty making any corrections or alterations. And then just an update on the Schedule 1 process is that probably what I didn't put in the table is that that is a sort of tried and true approach that the community has a good understanding of and has the full range of ability to be involved. And you can revise those provisions through variations or the appeal process to pick up any corrections. So I might just, I'll finish my couple of slides on this and then I will stop for questions if that's all right. Kate,
that sounds good. That sounds good, Maxine. Thanks.
Okay, so if I could just go to the next slide, please. So what we have got to is that if council decided to proceed with the new ISPP process, my recommendation is that you wouldn't make that decision today. You would give staff just a little more time to seek advice on the scope and implications, because it has been changing so very recently for us, so that we could get a clear view on what would be included. We would also come back to you with whether or not you would need to engage as a consequence of our significance and engagement policy, of whether the decision was so significant that it did need some consultation. But the consequence of that is that the notification of the plan change would get extended, probably into late this year as opposed to August, as we are trying to aim for. Likewise, the SPP process, that complexity of process would extend the notification date, and that wasn't quite clear in my report. And I have no changes to the risks on Schedule 1. And Robin, if you could go, sorry, Dania, to the next one. Kate asked me to prepare just a sort of a timeline comparison of the various options so that you could see what the consequence of choosing any of these pathways were. And essentially, if you're to choose the intensification pathway, we would need to go away, come back to you with some more advice. If you chose to engage with the community about embarking on this pathway, then we would need to have some time for engagement. We would be aiming to get a decision from you before you broke this triennium to use that new process, and then we would apply to the ministry, who have to produce an order in council, and we can expect that to take several months. And then in early 2023, we could notify the plan change, and then it would happen quite quickly that we would have submissions, hearing, and a decision, and no appeals. So 2024 is when you could probably expect that whole process to be wrapped up. For the streamlined planning process, the next few months for us would be preparing the applications. We would get that final decision from you in September to lodge it with the ministry under that process. We would then work with them to refine any further information requests they have. They consult with iwi and other ministers. The minister issues their decision, and then we can notify that plan change. And then it goes through the submission hearings. And I do note there is a small opportunity for limited appeals for designating authorities and things, so it's very, very limited. But again, that would probably be wrapped up in, I would suggest, later 2024. The Schedule 1 process, our standard process, would see us preparing the plan change over the next couple of months. We would get a decision from this council to notify the plan change. Our goal is August of this year, which I have noted meets our national policy statement timeframe requirements to give effect to that new NPSUD. And then the plan change would get notified through September. We would deal with submissions, and then a hearing and decision would in all likelihood occur through 2023. The big uncertainty for that one is that if you are to get a lot of appeals or very complex appeals, is that we don't know how long that will take to resolve those appeals. And for some plan changes, you can get a small number of appeals and you resolve them by way of mediation, and that can be a 6 to 8 month process. In other cases, you might be several years working with the Environment Court to work through a large number of appeals. That is probably the extreme end of it. You might be looking more at a sort of a 12-month period. So I think that's kind of the gist of what I really needed to convey. I still have retained my recommendation for the streamlined planning process. However, I have noted that we could work with any of these options, and it really does come down to how quickly you want that plan change notified, how much ability you want the community to have a say, and also, how much control you want to retain over the content of that plan change. So if you looked at it in sort of descending order, the ISPP gives you the least control, SPP gives you a little bit more control, and Schedule 1 gives you the most control. And then it's almost the reverse for timing. So Schedule 1 will be the longest, SPP moderate, and ISPP probably the fastest to an operative plan. So I'll leave it there and take any questions.
Thanks, Maxine, for explaining that so well. And, this is the thing, time versus control, I guess. And I think that some things we've been waiting a long time to get done, so hopefully we can get this done in a fairly timely manner. I have questions from Rachel Sanson, then Brian, then Tim, then Mia, Rachel. I just have a quick question before you go, Rachel Sanson. In terms of the agenda itself, on page 23, it talks, to me, there's a couple of advantages of the ISPI, I think is what you call it, ISPP system, in terms of things like 20% of street facade to be in glazing. Can you just expand on how some of the good parts of that could be incorporated into now? I know that you touched on that in the workshop this morning in terms of it being 20% landscaping rather than 20% permeable surfaces. Maybe you could just let us know how you could bring in some of those principles into option 2.
Yeah, okay, so if you choose option 2, you are allowed to, you can pull in whatever standards you want and you can propose them. And that is the choice of council as to how many of these standards from the new legislation you would bring forward or not. So you may choose to bring in most of them, or you may choose to bring in some and propose alternatives or amendments to them. If you go with option 1, which is the ISPP singularly, you largely have to live with those MDRS standards, those new medium density residential zone standards. But there is still mechanisms to reduce where those standards apply and create some nuance with them. You have to do it through this process of qualifying matters or arguing whether or not something's a relevant residential zone. And then it's really up to the council to justify why you might take a different approach.
Okay, that's quite helpful. So the advantage of option 2 is that you could look at the standards in option 1 and tweak them to fit our community feedback and our thinking already, plus bring in some of that central government thinking. And so officers would take the time to look at option 1 and see what principles could be incorporated into option 2 as well.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thanks, Maxine, for clarifying that. Rachel Sanson.
Thank you very much through the chair. Kia ora koutou. Kia ora, Maxine. Thanks very much for this. Just got a couple of questions. In terms of, you said that the options kind of from the top down enable us, and I assume you mean maybe council, to have more input, so that Schedule 1 allows council to have the most input into planning decisions. Would it be the same that Schedule 1 also allows community, kind of the greater amount of community engagement, and would there then be a decrease for SPP and ISPP in that space?
Yes, yep, that's correct. It follows much the same order, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then thinking about greenfield, expansion, is which of these options is most likely to allow for greenfield expansion, if any?
All of them, as I understand, can. The Schedule 1 and SPP process are the clearest that it is absolutely within the scope of what you can do. We have had some sort of conflicting information around the ISPP process for how and to what extent greenfield can come in and how you justify it and what process that has to go through. So that is particularly one item where we would be seeking some further legal advice around any areas that are to be rezoned from, say, a more rural zoning.
So, but as far as indicated, ISPP and SPP would both allow for greenfield expansion more easily than what we currently have with standard plan, and also with the least amount of community input. Is that correct or not correct?
Yeah, I don't know about more easily, but certainly it's potentially faster because of that removal of the appeal process. Yes.
Okay, so faster and with less community input into that
last stage. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. No more questions.
Thanks, Rachel. Brian.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I've got a whole range of questions really. The first one is around the conversations you've had with the officials at MFE. And I'm wondering how much weight we can attach to those sorts of conversations, or how binding or they can be, or so I suppose that's a pretty open sort of a question. What weight can we attach to those conversations? And
well, it's difficult, Brian, to answer that because they're operating and trying to give us their advice and their interpretation of the legislation of what was perhaps intended by the ministry, or what they hoped to achieve. But as always, it comes down to the actual legal interpretation and the test of that once we notify something as to whether or not how we'd interpret it, or who will take an MFE's advice on the interpretation is interpreted by others. And hence we had started to sort of look around at some of how other councils are starting to interpret it. And I have to say the variation is pretty wide.
Right. So seems like a pretty open, almost, you don't know. We don't know how it's going to land.
Not at the moment. And that's why I've suggested we would need our own legal sort of advice on this matter before we sort of really confirmed that we were confident that this process was appropriate, the ISPP process.
And I appreciate the complexities. It's not going to be that's not going to be simple legal advice to obtain. Okay, the next one is those councillors who have gone through the Streamlined process. Now, it's been around since about 2017. So what 4 or 5 years experience with us? Is that about right? Yep. So how many councils have gone through the Streamline Planning process?
I don't have an exact number of how many have been through. I'm certainly aware of 3 that I'm aware of, and could provide a limited amount of commentary on.
Okay, so not a huge number. Do you get an indication of the time frame? I know you've put that sheet up before, but based on that, what you know of who have gone through the Streamline Planning process, you go through various steps like this, getting getting the approval from the minister, and then submitting it, and then getting a decision from the minister. With all those steps, what's the best each of those steps? How long do you think it would take?
The ministry advised that takes at least 4 to 6 months from when we put it into the ministry for them to get a decision from the minister that he accepts it for the Streamlined Planning process. Yeah. And their caveats on that are the quality of the application.
Well, it'll be exceptional.
Yeah, and how much sort of further information they need. Their understanding and comfort with how much iwi engagement has happened, or any understanding of how the removal of the appeal rights would potentially affect Māori in terms of any processes they have underway in this area. And yes, and how much sort of engagement we had done around it. So in many ways, I think we're in a pretty good position because we have consulted on the draft, largely on many of the provisions through the draft plan. And we certainly have had a good relationship with iwi in terms of the preparation. So, you know, if I had to make a guess, I would say we would be on the shorter rather than longer end of that. But of course, it's also still up to the ministry to be able to process this, and the ministry does have a extraordinary amount of things on at the moment, and so there is a risk that anything going into the ministry will take longer than anyone hopes for.
Yeah, that's the process. Yeah, because you know, with the draft Nelson plan, I think we've done at least 2 rounds of consultation. We've had extensive consultation with iwi, extensive consultation with stakeholders and practitioners. So I'm pretty comfortable. So the other one about the national policy directions, you know, we've got the urban development, but are there any others that we would need to consider as part of meeting those national policy directions that we could probably help us ramp it up? I'm thinking things like the protection of highly productive soils, freshwater management, those sorts of things.
Well, any plan change we put forward, you have to consider all of those national instruments. So, you know, and for most part, they have already been anticipated in the plan change that we have. The only problem would be if any new national policy statements got issued between us being where we are now and notifying our plan change.
Right. Have we turned our minds, okay, I'll carry on. Have we turned our minds to any sort of unintended consequences of if we went down this way, that or consequences unattended or otherwise?
The SPP process?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my biggest concern would be that as you don't have an appeals process, the decision from the minister about the plan change is pretty final, and you don't get much opportunity to make any corrections. And I guess I've been through a fair few plan changes, and it would be very rare to get through a plan change process and not come out the other end and go, something needs a little bit of a tweak.
Yeah, okay.
Or a correction, and usually you can go through the Environment Court either by your own appeal process to make those corrections. Otherwise, I mean, there are legal avenues to make corrections, of course, but in terms of fixing things that didn't quite come out right, yeah, there is a risk around that. I'm not sure, Claire, do you have any other thoughts on unintended consequences?
No, through the chair, I think you've covered it, Maxine. It's good.
Right. Yeah. Probably the last area. In terms of the investment we've made in the draft Nelson plan, in terms of budget and staff time and resources, and then consultation we've done, are we able to still retain or capture the value of that investment in terms of both the streamlined planning process and or the streamlined and the tier, I'll call it the tier 1 option?
The short answer is yes to all three. You are using, a vast majority of the information that you've prepared, particularly around your hazards, your understanding of your heritage, your understanding of where the community wants to sit. But I think probably the riskiest one for value is around that ISPP, the tier 1 process, because you are just importing a set of standards that we haven't necessarily, been working previously on. However, as you are aware, a lot of those new standards in that tier 1 process actually are very similar to what we'd put forward through the draft Nelson plan anyway. So I think it's probably splitting hairs to say, that there's much difference in that value. In any of these processes, you will be drawing on a huge amount of the work that's already been done to prepare the plan change.
Right, okay. I'll leave it there. I've probably got some more questions, but I'll let others have a crack.
Oops, I had myself on mute. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm aware of the time and we probably need to take a break. I have Tim, then Mia, Rachel, then Matt, then Rohan. What I'm going to suggest is that we hear from Tim and Mia, Rachel, and then take a break. I'm happy to move the officer recommendation, which is option 2. I think if anyone has any questions of clarification which will determine their decision making, which they need officers to come back to us after the lunch break, could you please raise them before the lunch break so that Maxine and Claire have time to discuss that, and then we'll come back and make the decision after lunch. So Tim and then Mia, Rachel.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Maxine. That last slide you had with the table was very helpful. So to get my full understanding of this, those 2 first options, the recommended one and the ISP, Streamlined Planning, both those you wouldn't have a notification. There wouldn't be a notification of plan change, only the third option, the standard. Is that right?
No, sorry. All 3 you notify the plan change,
Okay.
and all 3 everybody gets to make a submission on, and all 3 have a hearing and a decision gets issued. The real difference is around the appeal process at the end.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
And perhaps what I ought to just really clarify is that under that ISPP, the first tier 1 sort of planning pathway, is that the rules have immediate legal effect. So as soon as you notify, then people can start using those rules for intensification, which means you will get housing sooner because those rules come in and it's more permissive and it allows for more intensification. So
Okay.
that is where the sort of speed comes from. You will start to see results much faster.
And when I see those first two options, looking at the advantages, disadvantages, apart from the standard one, we'd be dependent on the decision of the Minister of Environment from what we put to them. How's that work? So once he's made a decision on what we put forward, that becomes the rules, that becomes where how we've zoned areas or where we can intensify. Is that right?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit more nuanced. So it still goes through a hearing panel. So the submissions are still heard by an independent hearing panel, but it's ultimately the minister who signs off the content of both of those processes.
And with that option, your recommended option, there's areas we've got currently which are medium density or general residential zones, etc. They would remain, or that's basically where we've been going for the process at the moment, deciding where we're going to sort of further intensify, and that will become what we go off, we send to the minister if we go with a recommended. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, and last question, out of those options, the recommended option, in your opinion, does that sort of line up closer to a tier 1 proposal or regulation that the government would?
No, the closest to tier 1 would be using the ISPP process. So tier 1s have to use that process,
yep.
And they have to apply all of those standards that are set out in the legislation. And they're all going through, they're frantically at the moment, all going through a process of trying to say, where can we create the nuance and how can we justify it using this term called qualifying matters or
and
relevant residential zone.
We're currently tier 2, but we don't have to necessarily fulfill the requirements of tier 2. Is that right?
That's right. Well, tier 2 are not required to use this process, but it's optional for us to join it. And if we were to request to join it, we need to provide evidence that we have an acute housing need.
This is for tier 2.
Yes, for tier 2s to join in and use this legislation. That's what we would have to provide to the ministry.
And where we've been going so far with light angles and building out close to boundary and how much land area you can intensify down to, that, well, this recommendation would be fulfilling that tier 2 pretty closely, would it be? That's what would be happening, the outcome?
Without preempting what the plan change will include, certainly you have asked us to look at how much of that new legislation could come through into a housing plan change for Nelson.
Okay.
So, those decisions are still yet to be finalised and made.
And why not? Last one, sorry, I didn't say last four. Last one, option 3, standard. I mean, it has some real benefits there, gives us a bit of control over that. We can still keep medium and more intensified in general, etc., and make those decisions and public engagement. Why not have Schedule 1 apart from the speed of effect and obviously the ability for people to
look, there's a lot of merit for following the standards process. That there's no real downside other than the risk around the appeals process taking longer, and meaning that a number of the rules don't have legal effect until that is resolved. There is of course a process where some of the rules, if they don't have submissions in opposition, can have legal effect once submission period has closed. So some parts of the plan change are likely to have immediate legal effect.
Well, that sounds good.
But you never know, and this is where the risk comes in, you never know to what extent those submissions will cover how much of the plan, and you don't know how much will be appealed. And so that's really just these other two processes cut away some of that risk.
They could well be very valid appeals.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Tim. I'm going to move over on to Mayor Rachel because we do need to have a lunch break. Mayor Rachel.
Kia ora koutou, Kate. You may have to come back to me after lunch as well because I've got quite a lot of questions. Maxine, the first one is just in terms of significant resource management issues. Do you consider that our housing might feature in significant resource management issues for Nelson?
Yes.
And on the base, just thinking about that issue of acute housing need, looking at the housing register at the moment, how do you think we rate? Acute, fine?
I think we'd be pushing into the acute territory based on the words have just gone out of my head, but it's along the lines of land value compared to income, affordability, essentially. And as I understand it, we are right up in that top quarter of that. So I would expect we would be candidates certainly for that ISPP process.
Thank you.
Claire, do you need?
That's good. That's fine. Correct.
So in terms of our current plan provisions, are they fit for purpose for achieving the intensification outcomes that we're seeking to try and address the acute chronic housing situation that we're in?
The operative Nelson plan is very old and drafted in the sort of mid-1990s. So it's hard to say that it really meets the current needs for our housing supply. And I think that's been sort of recognised for a while by virtue of the council initiating the plan review and working very hard to create more intensification opportunities as part of that process.
Okay, so just in terms of thinking through the appeal processes that would operate under Schedule 1, and look, this is a bit of a, you may not be prepared to answer this question because it's going to require a qualitative answer rather than a quantitative, but from your experience, the people that are in social deprivation, under enormous financial stress, don't have housing, are they the people that normally appear in appeals around plan changes, or are they poorly represented?
My experience would be you don't see an awful lot of those people through the plan change appeal processes that I've been involved in.
It'd been my experience too that the people that most need the housing are the least likely to be there in the appeals process, and it's very much a money-driven game in my experience as to who runs appeals and around plan changes. Just in terms of your answers to the questions to Councillor Sanson before, I just want to clarify in terms of enabling greenfield development. I thought I heard you say that we'll go kind of in order of ISPP is likely to be less enabling in terms of greenfield. Schedule 1 would be most enabling, most likely because of the appeal opportunities, or very similar to SPP. I just want to make sure I've got that right, because then I heard another question come where I think the answer was perhaps not so clear.
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
No, I'm asking the officer. I'm asking the officer.
Yeah, because I didn't ask it. I didn't ask that.
Just asking the officer in terms of the green differences for greenfield.
Well, as I had understood the legislation, all three can be used for greenfield rezoning, but the process for greenfield rezoning under the ISPP is different to the process for the rest of the provisions through that planning pathway. We have been seeing some correspondence from other councils who are questioning that process, and that is something for me that I feel uncertain about how that actually works within that new process, and it would be a focus of some additional legal advice around it. But for the other two processes, the SPP, you would propose any greenfield rezoning like the same as for a Schedule 1 process, but of course you wouldn't have the appeal rights under the Streamline Planning process or under the ISPP.
But equally, somebody could come in through the Schedule 1 process seeking expansion of zoning.
Yes.
Yep, and they'd be well within their rights to do that.
Yes. Yes, they would. And that sometimes that comes down to how we frame the scope of the plan change that we have notified. For example, it could either be a plan change that's limited in scope to existing zone changes, or it could be a plan change that seeks to rezone new greenfield areas as well, and that will ultimately be a decision of the council as to the scope of that plan change.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of your comments around, you made a comment very quickly around requiring authorities, I think, and I just want to understand what their legal rights are in the processes.
Yep. So they are one of the very few parties who can appeal through the Streamlined Planning process.
Okay, and probably just for the benefit of the members of the committee, they may not be aware of what requiring authorities are.
So they're usually your big network utility providers, Waka Kotahi, Network Tasman, Council for wastewater, parties who can usually require designations.
Okay, thank you.
For public works.
Okay, and then just in terms of the different processes, so what I'm hearing is in terms of the ISPP process, at this point, you haven't got full clarity on the legal issues. Have you got some legal advice around the different on the ISPP and the SPP?
We've had some advice relating to the ISPP. I can't go into that in this public forum. And we have not felt the need to take legal advice on the SPP process. It's an established process through the RMA.
Maxine, just when was the SPP process introduced into the Act? Do you remember? I reckon it's a good.
I'm going to say it's at least, I want to say 4 years ago at least, but I have got time warp going on with my years at the moment, so I'm not 100% sure that I've got that right. I'd have to find that out for you, Rachel.
Yeah, it's not a new
Brian
thing.
said 2017, didn't you, Brian? I think Brian mentioned.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
I'm going to pause for lunch. If anyone has really urgent questions which they feel like Maxine might need some time to come back with replies, could you please email them through? I just had a quick follow-up question, Maxine, which you might like to think about over lunch, having heard Mayor Rachel and Tim's questions. You know how the option 1 allows immediate legal effect? Is there any way we could start with option 2 And then if it lines up with the nuanced qualifying matters of option 1, we could switch it into that process once we understand better. Because what I'm sensing from you is that you want to get started, and if we pause to do option 1, we're pausing, we're delaying the start of that process. So could we carry on with option 2 and then switch it over, that if it aligns enough with option 1 that it moves into that process at a later date?
You potentially could, but you would have to do different work, just because the ISPP process is different in terms of how you justify things and how you describe things. So you would potentially end up with some wasted effort and work while you were busy trying to prepare your SPP application and finalise the plan change, when in actual fact, if you were going to bring down the ISPP and the medium density residential standards of that legislation, then you'd potentially be having to cut out some of the work that you'd just done under the SPP process.
And so thank you. And in terms of the limited appeal process of option 2, does that mean that parts of it could take immediate legal effect as well?
My understanding is that the legal effect follows in the same way as the Schedule 1 process, but I would probably need to just double check that.
Okay, so we might gain some time for parts of it. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'll come, Mayor Rachel, I assume you might have a couple more questions after the break.
I do, and they're one of them, just before we go to the break, because I wasn't able to join you this morning, could I just ask, was the legal advice discussed in your confidential briefing this morning? I just don't want to waste time if people have already had that. Well, what was the reason for being in confidential this morning?
The reasons that, well, we didn't actually just clear it, but the ones that I thought that we'd meet would be in terms of 7A, prevent material loss to the public, 7F1, free and frank advice from the officers, and 7J, prevent the improper gain or advantage.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McGurk. Brian, thank you. So yes, I will have some more questions.
Okay, so after the break, we'll come back to Mayor Rachel, then Matt, then Rohan, then Rachel Sanson. I think we will take 45 minutes, so we'll come back at 1:30. Bear in mind, everyone, that we've also got to get the urban bylaw deliberations done too. So yeah, just be mindful. I think that this is a really important decision to make, and the questions are really good in terms of teasing out the nuances. So thanks for asking the questions, but be aware of time as well. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 45 minutes. I think I thought it was. Apologies, everyone. Apologies, everyone. Can you all see me? Okay, can you hear me? See me? Great.
You're breaking up a little bit, Kate.
Is that better now? Yeah, great. Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to hand back over to Mayor Rachel to finish off asking her questions.
Oh, thanks, Kate. Maxine, I just want to come back to the process if we go to work with the ministry. I just want some greater, a kind of a process step. What's kind of missing for me today is with the SPP process, actually that kind of collaborative engagement with the ministry. So if we're going to take that step, I'd actually like to be able to get an indication from them on their level of service and ability to progress the plan change. So have you got any suggestions on how we might approach that? Because I think what you're asking for today is us to give a direction. You're not asking, and then you've got to go away and do some more work. Is that right, or is this it? You make the call, committee makes the call today, and that's setting the pathway. What's the next step?
I think the resolution is to initiate the SPP process. I think that's what the resolution specifically says. So, so then it would be, yes, starting to work with the ministry to make sure that we fully understood what we needed to have in the application, and we would carry on with our plan change content. So when you talk about level of service and collaboration, are you talking about their ability to process this plan change in a timely way, as opposed to how much actual say they have on the content? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it's about the timeliness of getting it through, because what I'm really conscious of is that, and you understand that from my questions, and you know very well what my concerns are, that we have got an acute problem and we're in a crisis around housing, and so we need to be responsive to the needs of our community. If we're doing it, I need to know that all agencies who are participating in this process have the capability and capacity to respond in a timely way.
Yes, so I did during the break look on the Ministry for the Environment's website as to how many active, how many streamlined planning processes there have been, and I see there's about 7, and a number of those are still in train and were lodged in 2020. So I guess what that does tell you is that it does take time to go through that process, and I appreciate that probably they've been hit by COVID through that and things, but they've probably also been affected by the ministry's reform program that does seem to be impacting their ability. On that said, they do have an SPP team who have been responsive to us to date. So I would have to go back to them, but I suspect that they would be saying much the same thing. They are dealing with a lot of work, and they probably are unlikely to give us any firm commitments of time. All
right, then if I'm trying to find a process here that is going to get as quick a result as we possibly can to deal with an acute housing need, I'm finding that I'm lacking the information that I need to make that decision today. I want to do it because, we just can't keep kicking this can down the road any longer. We've got to make some progress. And so on that basis, if I'm weighing up, because it's about getting results, right? We wanted to get something done here. It's no more sitting on our hands. We've attempted to get the full plan out. We've said, right, no, that's going to take too long. We've gone to this pathway to get it done faster. Then I'm kind of listening to you today going, well, really the ISPP is the way to get it done, because we basically get legal effect at the beginning, and that means we crack in. But I really, I'm kind of having this conversation, thinking I almost want to play this, which I possibly will send a link through to the ministry and the minister's office to go, hey, look, we want to partner with you, government. We really want to get this done, but we need to know that you can do your end if we go SPP in accordance with the recommendation. So it's not so much a question for you, Maxine, but Kate, it's probably, you know, I'm feeling a real sense as mayor that we just cannot sit around and go down what, you know, the Schedule 1 process. I've worked with that for decades now, and it is a very slow process. So given the urgency that we're, you know, in the crisis that we've got, I want to make sure that what we choose is actually going to be given effect to, and I think there's going to have to be some sort of follow-up conversation. So it might be something that you want to make a decision in committee today, with it to be with further information coming through to the council meeting on the May the 10th. You know, that may be one of the things.
Okay, that's quite helpful, Rachel. Yes, I mean, I completely agree with you. My initial feeling about it was that option 1 was the best option, but I think there's a time delay with that too while Maxine gets more information, and I do have to trust the officer advice on this one, plus the loss of the consultation that we've already done. Picking up on the Mayor's questions, can I just ask a question of clarification in terms of the workshop we had this morning? Does that apply just to option 2? So if we went with option 1, that conversation would no longer sit in with option 1?
We would be trying very hard to bring forward what we put forward to you in under option 1, and that is the bit that we would need to get our legal advice to say, are those matters things that we can bring into scope, and is there enough tools in that ISPP legislation for us to nuance those standards enough for what you have kind of indicated you want. And that's where I'm unable to tell you that today, whether that mechanism would deliver that set of standards that you want to push forward.
Okay, so rather than delaying to the next Environment and Climate Committee meeting, could we, picking up on Mayor Rachel's comments, could we move a recommendation which asks you to further investigate timelines for both options 1 and 2 and bring it back to the next council meeting with that subsequent and the ability for us to utilise the work we've already done through option 1? I guess my biggest concern about option 1 is we lose some of the amenity value and character values, and urban greening is a really important part of intensification, and I kind of need to know that that's going to be available for us to promulgate as well.
I might just need to take a moment to just confer with Claire and Natasha about the ability to turn that around for the 10th of May meeting, just because the agenda for that probably closes for us at a staff level next week. So can I just ask for an adjournment for just a couple of minutes to have that conversation with Claire and
what
Natasha?
I might get further questions from Matt, Rohan and Rachel Sanson, and then we'll adjourn. In case, then we'll adjourn after that. So I'm going to go to
Kate. Can I just interrupt? Yes,
yeah.
Can I just say to Maxine and Claire, this is probably the biggest, most significant decision that council is going to make in this term to address a very, very real issue. And Maxine, if it moves it forward, I'm very happy to take something as a, late into the agenda. So this gets priority for me. I think it's on the basis that it's council's priorities. Thanks, Kate.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So Matt, then Rohan, and Rachel Sanson.
So yeah, I want to get roadblocks out of the way, and I want to speed things up for housing too. But I've got a concern about the ISPP option. What about the concern that I have heard expressed in other parts of the country, that it incentivizes intensification in the wrong places? The argument I've heard is that by making the MDRS standard apply to all urban areas, we're effectively creating a financial incentive for property owners to develop on cheaper land, which is typically further away from town, further away from amenities, and that creates more people commuting by private motor vehicle.
I think that's probably something that we would be trying to see if we had an ability to apply these terms of qualifying matters, or whether there was any scope in terms of where these standards apply to. There do seem to be some mechanisms for trying to influence that, and again, we just really need to sort of see if we could put forward something justifiable under that new legislation to try and avoid that happening, Matt. So how about I note that as something that we try and get a bit of clarity on.
That would be very helpful, because yeah, I think a lot of people would be concerned about that. Thanks.
I'll go. My question, are you?
No, Rohan. Sorry, just to finish, Rohan. Sorry about this, Rohan. I was just thinking of the expression I wanted to get across. I really want to see change. We all want to see change, but I don't think we want short-term gain for long-term pain. Thank you, Rohan. Sorry.
My question's just around that staff advice, and I guess in some ways similar to what Rachel has said. So you've said you're sticking by the recommendation that's in the report. So is the staff advice that it's not worth continuing to explore what options are available under the ISPP?
I wouldn't like to say it's not worth it, Rohan. I guess when we looked at everything, my sort of conclusion was the SPP, but you probably will have picked up that I am kind of open to any of those other options. It is really just that waiting between, and I think this is the political call, is the timeframes, the local input, and I've forgotten the last one that I had. The timeliness, the amount of public input, and the amount of council control.
Thanks. So I'll just signal that I'd definitely be keen to continue to explore what we've got available to us under the ISPP as being the most expedient way to address this crisis.
Brian, Kate has dropped out and she's just asked if you could pick up the chairing, please.
Right, thanks, Rohan. That's your question. Rachel, then Glenys.
You're on silent, Rachel.
Oh, right, sorry. No.
Thanks. Kia ora, Judine. Thanks through the chair. Kia ora koutou. So I'm just a little unsure about what the decision is that we're going to be making today, and signalling that I'm probably keen to call a division. And I can confirm that if the chair would like, one way or other, once I see the recommendations, the final recommendations up in front of us. Thanks very much.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So
could I?
Glenys, you opportunity for questions, and then we'll take a pause.
Well, it was just more around the inconsistencies that Maxine has pointed out in the ISPP, and I suppose my concern is those inconsistencies aren't actually minor things, and to my mind anyway. Really keen to provide housing, but certainly I think we need to look to existing homeowners as well. You know, we're not giving with one hand and disadvantaging with the other, and that's my concern with the ISPP.
Okay. Maxine, is it probably you want to just pause for a moment just to come back with some updated advice?
Yeah, if I could just take 5 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take an adjournment for Oh, it's till 2 o'clock. So we'll just pause till then. That'll give you plenty of time. And hope.
Thanks, Brian.
I'll
And
have
I'm
plenty of time.
back. I'm back. Sorry, my computer seems to get too hot or something. So
Yeah.
I'm back, and it should have resolved by then. I'll be back on my computer rather than my phone. Picking up on Rachel Sampson's question, I'm going to, in that 5-minute adjournment, see if Maxine and Claire, we can have a quick conversation about what an alternative recommendation could be, please.
Okay, well, we'll adjourn. Yeah, as I say, we're adjourned. So till
Thank you.
2 o'clock.
How do we do that, Maxine and Claire?
I'll just quickly send you a Teams invite. If you could just
Great,
jump
thank you.
into a Teams invite. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Okay, hopefully we're all coming back. We just need another minute or two for Claire and Maxine to email some words through to the GAs, and then we'll try and get those up on the screen.
So I have just emailed it through. Hopefully it's coming through now.
Picked it up. Just give me a couple of minutes, please.
So whilst Robin's getting them up on the screen, I'll just read it out. This is what Maxine and Claire are suggesting as a path forward, that we request officers to report timelines, process issues and the outcomes of discussion with the Ministry for the Environment regarding a planning pathway for a housing plan change, excluding Schedule 1 to the 10th of May Council meeting. I presume we would receive the report first, so that would replace number 2. What I might do is wait for that to come up on the screen. I think, have I just lost everyone? No, can people hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Just can't hear anyone else. Maxine, does that sound about right?
Yeah. I mean, I understand what it is that you want us to do.
Hear you, Maxine?
Oh. Can anyone else hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you, Maxine.
I can.
Can you hear me now, Kate?
Oh, that's because I muted the computer. Right, hopefully I can hear everyone now. Here we are. Okay, apologies. I muted the computer in the process of trying to switch the phone. Maxine, could you repeat that again, please?
Yeah. I mean, I understand what it is that you'd like us to do. You want us to go away and find the, more detailed information around the ISPP, the timeframes and some of the implications around that, and also the SPP in terms of the capacity of MFE to contribute in a timely way to that process, and then come back and report that to you on the 10th of May.
Mayor Rachel, that sounds good. Could we make sure that that's reflected really well in the minutes? Mayor Rachel and then Rachel Sanson.
Thanks, Kate. Maxine, I just think we want to make it clear that we're going to make the decision at the council meeting as well. So you report back the information and then we've got to make a call on it as to what we're going to do. So, Robin, I'm just not sure that because then we'll basically it is, after receiving it, then we'll confirm how we're going to, and that's probably not the right word to use, but that we're going to have to then work on what we're going to do. So we need to.
So maybe we need a number 3 where we say confirms a path forward at the 10th of May council meeting. That work, Maxine?
Well, I think it's defers. It's basically we're deferring the decision on the plan, the process until the council meeting. So in other words, we're going to make it at the council meeting, defer it to be made at that meeting. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to try and wordsmith this at this point, but yeah. I think that's essentially. I just want to make sure we're clear, because what I don't want to do is be stuck with what we're doing is doing the reporting, and then it's got to cycle back to another environment committee meeting to make the decision.
Yeah, that's really clear.
So through the chair, if I can suggest at the end, it says to the 10th May council meeting for the council to make a decision. That would be simple enough to.
You okay with that, Mayor Rachel?
Yeah. Would we make a decision for the pathway to initiate Housing plan change 29. I think so, something along those lines. That we should do it. Okay. And I certainly don't want to hold this up, so I just want to make sure that when we go through, we can be sure. So, Kate, can I just ask one question just of Maxine? So, Maxine, the critical part for me is when the rules get legal effect. So, essentially, it's because often we'll get hung up on the whole process to get the final adoption of the plan, but actually the critical part is when the rules get legal effect. So on the SPP option, that you were looking at, that you're recommending, I just want to check the subdivision rules would have legal effect at notification, because they're the big ones. If you think about, I'm just thinking about what some of the big ones that we've worked so hard on, would they have legal effect at that point?
Under the ISPP.
No, SPP.
SPP. Can I double check that and report that back as part of this process? Sorry, I don't. Okay. I can't categorically tell you that.
No, that's okay. So those are the sort of matters as we're coming through to make this decision that I think are quite important for the elected members to be really clear on. That once you go through this process and you start it and you notify it, there's various steps along the way that work has legal effect in terms of the decision making for consenting purposes. So it'll start to come in. And what we're trying to do and achieve at this point is actually giving effect to that really good work that we've done, where we've gone and thought about how we want to grow in our, how we want to grow Nelson, and where we see opportunities are particularly around the intensification areas. And there's some that we're not going to be able to do. There's a bit of a sequence on other work, but that's, I think, what we've got to keep in mind. We've got to go, yep, the ISPP offers an option, but there were some things in there that we probably think that our work we've done on the Nelson plan actually is a better fit for our community. That's where I've gone, look, actually, we worked really hard on that. We've been working on it for years, and we've actually got something that I think will get really good buy-in from our community because they're familiar with it, they've seen it, and they've given us feedback on it. The downside to the ISPP, as Glenn has said, is there are big policy points within that work and standard directions that aren't as closely aligned to actually what we landed on for our community. So the more that we can tailor this to be picking up the work we've done, but getting it out and giving effect to it as quickly as possible, that's the sweet spot that we need to hit. So I think that would be how I would describe it, is what I would be looking to achieve. Thanks, Kate.
I absolutely agree, Mayor Rachel. That's what I was hoping to try and achieve too. Rachel Sampson.
Thank you, through the chair. Kia ora, I'm just wanting for the resolution that, or the recommendation that we're to vote on, could somebody just remind elected members what the discussion with the Ministry for the Environment is for and around?
The primary purpose is to get some clarity around their capability to contribute to the SPP process in a timely way, so that if they're telling us something like 4 to 6 months to get a decision, and then going back to the minister after the plan change has gone through, what sort of timeframes they can expect to turn that around in.
So that's not an assumption that we're going to do the SPP, it's just getting clear information, is that correct?
Yes, that's what Mayor Rees asked us to do, and we would probably...
Just so I know what I'm voting on.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
We would also talk to them about the scope of the ISPP material as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would be really interested to understand the more about the scope of the ISPP. Yeah, okay, thanks. And I probably don't need a division on this.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, Maxine, I think you summed it up very well before, where you said you would talk to them about both paths and try and give us a bit more feedback on I know that their preference is that we take the ISPP path, but if our preference is we take the SPP path, how can they support us in making that as fast and expedient as possible? And I think Mayor Rachel summed up in terms of how can we ensure that that has a is once it's notified has a legal effect straight away. So I think those are sort of the issues we're trying to tease out between now and the 10th of May. I'm going to go to Brian and then Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I'm just
I feel like Rohan had his hand up too. Sorry, apologies if I missed people.
yeah, I'm just trying to think of the resolution. Yeah, a couple of aspects that I'd really like to see included in the advice that comes back on the 10th of May. I suppose this seems an eminently probably a pragmatic way to sort of resolve the issue, but I'd like to make it clear that we're just deciding between the ISPP and the Streamline process. So it's, it's A or B. So that's the consider. It might be helpful if some independent legal advice, bearing in mind some comments that was made earlier on. Just looking at my notes about it's rather incomplete at the moment, lack of clarity in the scopes being adjusted with the ISPP as other councils are probing and prodding the aspects. So some independent legal advice about, the scope or what could be, what we could reasonably rely on. I think that's important. I'm already hearing it's just talking about residential zones. I need to make that probably needs to be very, very clear. That's what we're talking about. The other thing I'd be interested, might be helpful in our decision making, is the which one would the yield capacity, and that may be some data that we can bring across from the FDS work. I'm not asking for any kind of detail, but what is the expected yield or development capacity that will be generated by either one? That might be a bit technical, but is that information that could be provided in a report?
I'll say we'll try, Brian.
We'll
try within that time frame, but we'll see.
I know that the reason I'm asking that is that when I've sort of been reading around this, and I'm looking at the what MFE done, in particular the Rotorua district, where they did exactly this, started on the SCP and then I think got converted into the ICP. One of the decisions was, one of the key decisions for the minister was, what is the development capacity that is generated? It's sort of one of those key aspects that the minister turns his mind to. I'm wondering. And the two others that I'm thinking is the level of engagement, or what engagement we've had with iwi or tangata whenua, and more importantly, or just as equally important, is the community engagement. Are we reasonably comfortable with the level of engagement of that, with particularly those two groups? And when we're talking about iwi engagement, that's a critical step. So that's the sort of information I'd like to see in the report that comes back on the 10th of May. I know it's a bit of a shopping list and might be a bit onerous, but I think when it comes to the decision about this, where we go one way or the other, I think these are critical points that I'd like to see in a report.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Tim.
Thank you for that. So I see the change, the recommendation is basically changed. We're delaying it till the full council meeting, but rather than having the 3 options, we're down to the 2 options. So you're saying excluding the standard schedule. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, I can't support that, because what we're doing is just changing the decision-making options that we got in front of us today, and removing an option 3.
Yeah, we're removing option 3, I think, because that's the mood of the whole. I get a sense that
so it's not the mood of the whole. This has become
majority. Sorry, Tim.
This has become a statement from workshops to council meetings. Suddenly, if there's a view which is not of a similar to a certain group, it becomes excluded. But we've got to keep our wording correct here. There are a range of views there, right or wrong, and so my view is that I will like to support us still having those options that we've got for today's meeting. I see we've delayed it, wanting some more information because we're wanting some sort of hybrid, but I don't support us suddenly cutting out. I see we're being used excluding Schedule 1.
So, excuse me, Kate, could I just get clarification, please? Because I didn't think you were excluding options today. You've got a report that considers options, and you'll need to go through to remove one. You'll need to go through the full debate, but you haven't got all the information in front of you today to do that. So, with due respect, I have to say that all three are valid options, and really you should be making your decision once you've got the further information coming to the council meeting as to which one it's going to be. I don't know how you could, weigh
well, I
those
think
up.
your sentiment was that you wanted something done in a fairly timely manner, and we've heard very clearly that option 3 will not be a fast process. So if everyone wants to keep option 3 on the table, I'm comfortable with that, but it's not going to, what I'd heard very strongly from the meeting is that we want to get on with the process and get on with the process fast, and we're trying to weigh up how quickly the Ministry for the Environment can support us in delivering to option 1 or option 2. If people have a preference for option 3, you could move that now and we could debate that now, but I don't think that involves going to the Ministry for the Environment to ask them questions about it. It's something which we just carry on as business as usual as far as I can see. So if Councillor Skinner wanted to move that as his preferred option, he's very welcome to do that.
What I'm clarifying here is we've changed what we were deciding on today, and we've got down there on the new part in there saying excluding schedule, and we haven't listened to all, we haven't debated, we haven't listened to it. I mean, by all means, I can move that option there, but I'm just putting there. I was just surprised that we suddenly come to that as if it was a exclusive view, but I'm not going to move a particular option. Maybe I should. I wanted just clarity. That's what we've got in front of us. The recommendation is to delay the decision today to the next meeting, which is the council meeting, but with not all 3 options on the table for debate once we've got information back. And that seems to be the case. But actually, I'm hearing 2 terms. I think Madam Mayor's saying one thing there and the chair saying something else. So I do need some clarification what's being progressed.
So I'll go to Maxine and Claire, but my preference is that Maxine and Claire don't spend a whole lot more time.
I'm not talking about preferences, I'm talking about what are the options we've got now.
Well,
please don't interrupt me, Councillor Skinner. I'd like it if you could, you've had your turn, you've made your point. If you have an amendment you'd like to make, you can make that. But these are the words I came up with in the adjournment. So you can, you've asked your question. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about if you have an amendment you'd like to move, and I'll go back to the officers to think about.
I look forward to the answer to that question.
Please don't interrupt me. Thank you, Maxine and Claire. Can you just speak as to whether we are going through a proper decision-making process if we make a decision today to exclude option 3?
My understanding is you have the ability to exclude option 3 as part of your decision making today, but it isn't a particularly onerous task for us to bring forward what we've put forward as sort of options considerations for the Schedule 1 process or option 3 and include it in the follow-up report for the 10th of May for completeness, if you would prefer.
Okay, thank you. Can we get the words back up on the screen, please, Robin, so I can have another quick look at it, and I'm just going to adjourn for
I'll put an amendment to what we've got there.
1 or 2 minutes. No one's actually moved this recommendation yet, Councillor Skinner, so I'm just going to call for an adjournment for a minute, please.
What's funny, we've got this on the table then. Okay.
We were trying to come up with some words. Okay, I'm going to come back to the meeting, and Robin, if you could get those words back up, and we'll just remove the little section around excluding option 3. I understood that was a reflection of the conversation at the meeting, but we can easily remove that. I've checked with the officers and there's not a lot more work involved. So I'm happy to move that, and I see that Rohan has put in the text box that he'd like to second. So Rohan, are you happy to second what we have on the screen now? Thank you, Rohan. I'm going to now suggest that we debate, and I'll reserve my right of reply. Rohan, would you like to speak to it at all as the seconder?
Yes, thanks, Kate. I'll just speak briefly. What we've got in front of us, or the report that we've got, doesn't have the full picture that we need to be able to make a robust decision on this. And I think it's incredibly important, knowing the acute housing need in the region, to explore those options that could move this along faster. I personally would be a little dismayed if we ended up going down a Schedule 1 process where we wouldn't see any changes for our people for at least 24 months, if not significantly longer, through that appeals process, which we know will not be the area in which those most affected by these planning regulations will be able to engage. The appeals process won't be a space where renters and first home buyers are accurately reflected. And so I think it's really important that we get back a full picture of how we could do this as quickly as possible, because we know we need to act.
Okay, thanks, Rohan. I'm just going to have 3 speaking for and 3 speaking against, and I'll go to Judine next. So if you could say if you're speaking for or against, Judine.
I had my hand up for questions from pre-debate, so I'm going to leave it. And as noted earlier, I need to leave, but I would have liked to have asked my questions. I'll leave them till May. Thank you.
Apologies, Judine. I didn't see your hand up until just now. Mayor Rachel.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much for to the committee for letting me talk to this today, and for the degree of questioning that I've had. It is really important to me that we do respond to the housing crisis. It is real. It is affecting many families in the region, and genuine attempts are being made at both the national and regional level to make progress on this issue. We have limited land availability, and we have rising costs, and we have a Nelson plan that is well and truly past its use by date in terms of driving the housing outcomes that we're seeking. We also have a responsibility to make sure that the decisions that we make are going to reflect the values and what is important to our community. And so this is a challenging process to work through. The Resource Management Act, as you all know, is going through a reform process, but that's the act that we're going to be using to try and advance this this round of changes to our housing provisions. I really appreciate the fact that you've allowed this to go to the 10th, and the only matter I would say is that if I find the 10th agenda is completely full, I may have to move it to a backup date, which is about a week later. So we'll just make sure as it goes through into the agenda process that if it has to move, it'll be moving to about a week later, and then I've got a reserved date sitting in there. So thank you very much for allowing that to happen, and thank you to the officers for going and getting that further information. It's critical that we do make well-informed decisions on matters that once you set this in train, it'll be a long time before you come back to redo it. So we've got to use our very best endeavours to get it as right as we can. But ultimately, this is going to end up being the old 80-20 rule, and we must not lose sight of the outcome that we're seeking while we're getting too lost in the weeds. not disrespecting the urban greening process in that comment being like in any way, Madam Chair. It wasn't reflecting on that. It's just genuinely we have to be making sure that we are, you know, they're actually responding to what are at the moment absolute cries for help from our community, and doing it in a way that's going to build a much better housing environment for Nelsonians, no matter what age they are or what housing typography they're after. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Rachel. Tim.
No, nothing there to add. I appreciate you've put the removed that excluding option 1. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to put the recommendation now. In fact, yeah, I'm not going to speak to it because we're running quite a lot behind, but I think this is a good outcome. I think that it's very nuanced, option 1 and option 2, in terms of the best path forward. So I think this gives the officers a bit more time to reflect on that. So all those in favour and all those against? And that looks like it's carried. Trudy, can't see your vote. Great, thank you. I think that's everyone. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is page 35. It's the Omnibus Report on Submissions to Central Government. And I have lost my run sheet and losing my computer, so I'm not sure which officer is speaking to this. Sorry, Claire. Oh, it must be at the end of the report. Maxine again.
Yeah. Sorry.
Maxine, busy day for you. You'll be exhausted by 4 p.m.
And you'll be completely sick of me too. Yeah. Look, I'll just take the report as read. I appreciate you're short of time. If there's any questions, I can answer them.
Do I have any questions? I don't seem to have any questions, so
sorry. Apologies. Thanks. Yep. Sorry. Could you just repeat where you're at? I'm just juggling between screens, trying to keep up with things. I'm just a little bit.
It's okay. We're on page 35 of our agenda. And it's approving retrospectively attached Nelson City Council submissions on Future Resource Management System and Environmental Reporting Act. All very technical.
Okay. Thanks so much.
I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Glenys? Oh, thanks, Rachel, but Glenys nodded her head before I heard you. So moved by myself, seconded by Glenys. All those, does anyone need to debate? No, it looks all good. So if we could vote, please, using our tick or cross. Oh, it just didn't work for me. And that motion is carried. Thank you so much, everyone. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Claire Barton, can you just help me with the page number? It must be around
55, but I'm just double checking myself. So it's page 56. It's the Environmental Management Fees and Charges Review.
Okay, and I presume we have Mandy speaking to this?
Correct. And
okay.
Apologies, Mark won't be able to be here. He's away sick.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. So Mandy, are you going to briefly introduce this item on the agenda, or Claire, did you want to speak as well? And thanks, I don't know if Maxine's still there, but thank you, Maxine, for all the reports and work you've done today. It's been a busy day.
I can introduce it, Madam Chair, and I'll be fairly brief. The fees and charges for the regulatory activities are proposed to increase largely by CPI to keep up with increasing costs. There are some changes that are new charges or are bigger than CPI. And the main large increase is the hourly charge out rate for resource consent processing. that is proposed to go up from 162 to 190 per hour. I have provided some comparisons with other councils and with other consultant charges, and that $190 per hour figure is comparable to that. I've also checked in with some additional councils to the ones I provided in the report, places like Christchurch, Dunedin, Wellington, and Invercargill, Hutt City, Porirua. And looking at those charges, the average is 185 for them, ranging from about 160 up to $205 an hour. So the average of 185, if you add CPI to that, that brings it up to 194. So that 190 figure is comparable to what's currently being charged by other councils and by external consultants. And it is an issue around the country about trying to retain and recruit for staff. There are staff vacancies throughout the country, and that's evident through some councils, like the Christchurch City Council website is currently displaying that resource consent applications are going to take 58 working days to be allocated to a planner. So that's about 3 months before they even start working on it. I've contacted Tasman District Council to see what their workload and their vacancies are like. They are similar to us. They are about 75% on time. They have vacancies, but not similar to us. They have about 90 applications waiting to be allocated. We have all our consents allocated, but we are using consultants to help us do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mandy. Do I have any questions? I'm going to move, Mel and then Brian. Mandy, first names today.
Thank you, Kate. Mandy, I'm looking here and I've got to ask, an increase in the building consent amendment deposit. Now, what is the background to that? How does it compare with other councils? And what prompted this large increase?
So through the chair, I'm not sure what the comparison is like with other councils, but the deposit, and it is literally, a deposit. So if it doesn't take as long, then they will get a refund, but it's proposed to increase that much because the average cost of processing amendments is at the higher level. And at the moment there is it's setting the wrong expectations out to people that if you pay that deposit, that's all the cost there's going to be. So, and they're having to charge just about everyone for that. So if they have the deposit level at the right amount, the average amount for processing that, then it makes it easier for everyone.
I see. So it's really tidying it up, is it? It's paying the actual amount that they're most likely to pay. Previously, that hasn't been the case.
Yes,
that's
through the chair,
correct.
that is correct. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarity. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Brian.
Yeah, two questions from me. First one is in terms of the planner's charges. Did you give any consideration to using a split rate between sort of a planner and a more experienced senior planner?
Yes, that system is largely in place in the larger councils where you can more easily allocate consents of different complexities to the various experience levels of staff that you have. It's also a fairness thing. I mean, when an application comes in, the applicant can't choose who gets to process their consent. So in my mind, it's fairer if the same amount gets charged for a similar consent than if it was split, there would be two different costs for the same thing. If a planner processed it versus a senior planner.
No, fair enough. And the other one is the review of the cost recovery policy. When's that likely? I see there's of the examples you've given, there's a huge variation between different councils. The cheaper ones have a higher or much lower cost recovery. So it's obviously subsidised by the ratepayer as a full. So is there any consideration been given to reviewing that?
So in terms of the finance, the
I see
revenue
that
and financing
we,
policy?
let's say half the cost between 40 and 60, so that's 50%, is comes from the fees and charges. So that means the ratepayer subsidising the other half. But there's a huge variation. I see TDC have got a much cheaper rate, but the ratepayers are paying a lot more or subsidising it. So what I'm asking is, was that a consideration reviewing the cost recovery policy?
Yeah, that happens every time we do the LTP. We review that. And last time we did it, I reviewed it based on staff time that they can give to consent processing. At the moment, at least 30 to 40% of staff time is taken up by public inquiries and other things that they can't charge. So it's fair that, the policy at 40 to 60% is about right last time I reviewed it, but yeah, we will review that again next time, LTP.
Good, thank you, that's all.
Thanks, Brian. Mayor Rachel.
Thanks, Kate. Maddie, can you tell me if all of your planning team are eligible to be full members of the New Zealand Planning Institute, or hold planning qualifications? So is everyone who's working in the consenting space qualified?
So not everyone in the consent team have a planning degree. Some people have got planning degrees and have got full membership. Other members have got a related degree, so it might be in geography or some kind of science background, and are associate members who are working towards getting their full membership. They just go a different pathway.
Okay, thank you.
Most are members, at least.
All right, great. That's good to know. Just in terms of the last time the fees were increased, the hourly rate, and apologies, it's probably on the report, I'm just multitasking on devices. What was the increase last? When do we make the last increase, and how much was it?
So it was in the last financial year, increased just by CPI at the time, which was a $2 increase.
All right, and so I'm just having a look at the comparative, and the one that does, I look at the councils around the country that you've put in there, but I note that it's, going to be $20 more per hour than Tasman District Council, and I just wonder if you could speak to, whether we're comparing apples with apples, what we're seeing there.
So as Brian alluded to, that everyone's needing to get their revenue and financing policies met, and there are varying degrees of what they're set at. So Tasman are very much more subsidised by ratepayers rather than costs being met by the consent applicants. So yeah, it is hard to compare just on a couple of figures. I have spoken with the TDC consent manager about the idea of raising levels to meet and be on a similar level to consultants, and she was very supportive with that idea, thinking that it's a fairer way and gives us more flexibility to ensure that the consents can be processed in a good time frame, as quick as possible.
Okay, but just I guess that's probably not a question for you, but my observation with that would be that we're providing a public service. We're not in a profit-driven consulting environment, and it's important that we don't use that as the private sector, dividend returning, profit-based methodology for what is a public service. So I guess I'm somewhat concerned that we're getting driven into a pricing spiral here, and when in fact what we should be doing is making sure that we retain our role as providing public services. So I guess I've got a question as to, and I've already signalled to the group manager that I'm extremely uncomfortable with that degree of increase, given the financial pressure on everybody. I don't mean that you then have to equalise it potentially across the rating base, but I'm actually not convinced that increasing the hourly rate is going to solve the problem. So listening to what you've talked about today, you've talked about Christchurch City having an absolute backlog. Tasman have got a backlog. Increasing the hourly rate will only work if there's surplus people, and you'd have to make it significant, and then you're starting to try and compete with private sector. Well, we're not in that wage band, we're in the local government wage band. Then I'm not even convinced that you'll get a result. So I guess what I can't see the cause in it, whether that's actually going to deliver. And I guess I'm trying to work out, Mandy, whether, where are these people coming from? Because there aren't any more, if that makes sense. So if people are motivated by, if the intention is to increase the hourly rate, so therefore you can increase the wage bands, I wasn't quite clear if that's what's happening, because I just can't see that working. So I can't see that increasing the hourly rate is going to solve the problem about the backlog of work.
Yeah, I understand all your points. And I think it'd be fair to say council management is very aware of the problem of retaining and recruiting staff, and ensuring staff are paid reasonably for their work is something that is being actively worked on, and to make sure that we can keep our good people, and lessen the attraction to going to other places.
Through the chair, if I can just add to that, Mandy, but that's not the driver for the proposal around these increased charges, because the driver for that is A, the revenue and finance policy and meeting those requirements, and B, we at the moment cannot on-charge the full hourly rates that we get charged by consultants. And so this is to try and bring it into line so that we can actually recover our costs that we're actually having to meet by using more consultants, given we've got a problem with not having a full staff. Would that be correct, Mandy?
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't charge out the consultants rate. If it's just a workload issue, so we only charge out at the staff hourly rate. So there is that mismatch. And I guess the driver behind this is to not have that gap.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. I think I'll leave it for the debate. Thank you.
Okay, I can't see anyone else with their hand up for questions, and I'm wondering if I have anyone who wants to move and second the recommendation. Pete, you've still got your tick up. Are you still with us? Maybe remember.
Yep, I'm sorry. I'll take it down.
Take your tick down. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
I just always vote yes.
Oh, okay. So it's just up there permanently for the whole meeting. No one wants to move and second the recommendation.
I'm happy to move.
Thanks, Brian. Looking at my other deputy chair, Mel. Yeah, Mel seconded. Thank you, Mel. So it's been moved by Brian, seconded by Mel. And I think, Brian or Mel, do you want to speak to it first, and then we'll just move into debate in the interest of time?
No, just in interest of time. The report's pretty self-evident. I've got nothing really to say. I'll just reserve the right to reply.
Okay, great. Mel?
Kate, the report is very clear. and most detailed. So no, very happy to just second that.
Great, thank you. Tim?
Thank you for that. I empathise with the difficult decisions here of the staff put to us to try and resolve some issues, but it is very disappointing to see the charges going up. The person on the street seeing those charges going up, would be hard for us to try and justify that, not diminishing the reasons given in the report. I think it is a goodwill and it's a service also that we are providing for our community, and obviously some of that does fall on rates burden, but the charges for the time for these consents and fees, etc., when you get up to $190 an hour for everyday stuff that both the commercial sector and the residential sector, when are needing our services, which they have to get sign-offs, etc., for, it's getting a bit of a tough ask. So I find it very hard to support the 17% increase on these charges. I'd be more comfortable with a CPI, noting there's potentially a bit of a shortfall and a rates burden, but I can't support a 17% increase. I can even difficult increasing it by the CPI, but that's become probably going to indicative of a lot of things that are going to go up within council and outside of council. But no, I would rather go option 1. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I understand your sentiment. Mayor Rachel?
Thank you, Kate. Look, I can't support the 17% rise either. I feel like we're getting ourselves into a price escalation process to fund private sector consultants, and I just don't think that's the appropriate mechanism we should be using. I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had here around actually efficient delivery of services, and it's across councils. In fact, it's across the entire local government sector. We've got to start being smarter about how we deliver services and not taking a fragmented view, council by council. This needs a whole of system review, and there's a point where I just have to say, and look, it might be making a point about it, but actually I've been making this point now to say we as a sector have to get smarter about how we're doing this work. We have to get smarter about the system we're operating under and really advocating strongly for a more effective system. It's where we are providing really, high quality advice to our public to be able to participate in these systems, then they rightly should be covered as public services. And so I just think this is the wrong way to approach this issue. To go back to look at the revenue and financing policy around this, there's nothing to stop us being to make a decision that is inconsistent with the policy when we actually go and grapple with the big issue. But I've just watched this year after year after year, and no one will bring me back something that grapples with the big issues. And so I'm just going to have to vote against it today.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Rachel. I haven't had any alternative recommendations, and I'm not sure whether you're voting against the entire suite or just part of it. But I guess what happens if I put this, I can't see anyone else wanting to speak to, if I put the recommendation, Robin, and it's lost, what happens then?
Through the chair, there is the option to move another recommendation to progress. You might want to look at taking some of this in parts if there's a particular recommendation that people aren't happy with.
Okay. I haven't heard anyone ask for it to be put in parts, so I'm going to put it as a whole.
I'm happy to foreshadow an alternative option 1, if that helps. That, I mean, like I said before, I've had my debate on this one, but I'm happy to foreshadow option 1.
Okay, so we'll put it, and then knowing that if it's not voted for, then we can put an alternative recommendation up on the table. I always forget that we didn't used to be able to do that, but now we can. All right, if you all want to tick in favour, green, against, red, please. Pete? It looks like it's lost with it. Oh, Pete's voted no too. Okay, so that recommendation is lost. Tim, you're going to come up with some words. So I will adjourn for a couple of minutes while you come up with those words. I'm going to adjourn actually for 10 minutes until 3 p.m. so everyone gets a break.
There we go.
Brian, are you there? Brian?
Yep.
I'm actually back now, back clear. It seems to have unfrozen itself. Thanks, though. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, Councillor Skinner, you should have some words with the with Robin. Yeah, Robin, can you share them up onto the screen, please?
So just a moment there, we just got done. So she's kindly typed in what we've got there, and it'll be put up shortly.
Okay, do you want to maybe read it out, Tim, if you've got them, or has only Robin got them? Oh, here we are. Great. So that's moved by yourself, Tim, and have we got a seconder?
I need a seconder to that. Thank you.
Just before you second it, can I just understand through Mandy, if we are doing only CPI, are there some of those things that we actually need to still go out and consult on? Just checking.
Yes, so the RMA requires special consultation, so does the Food Act.
Okay.
Through the chair, sorry, Mandy, was that for the Food Act, did you say? Or all of them?
So the Food Act and the RMA require special consultation for fees and charges.
Okay. Something cool.
Brian, I can see your hands up. You've got a question?
I do.
Thanks.
Just in terms of the what's been put up on as the amendment, does that still meet our revenue and financing policy?
No, I don't think it does.
No.
No, it
No,
won't.
wait.
It won't.
And there's one further thing I just want to set some clarification on too. Sorry. The Building Act charges. So Tim, are you not accepting of the change to the deposit amount that we were proposing to put up? Because that was quite specific.
Wait, let me bring it up. That was a new one, I see. Yeah, no, I'm happy for that to be still in. So that's a new deposit, is that right?
We already have a deposit, but we're just increasing the amount to more realistically cover what we actually end up charging them anyway at the end of the process.
Okay, what was it? We didn't have a deposit there before, did we? Oh, it doesn't matter.
So there was a deposit for amendments that was increasing by a lot more than CPI. There were also a couple of new charges coming in there as well. And then the rest were increasing by CPI.
No, okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to leave what you've got down as a recommendation for the deposit introduction.
So just to help Robin, Mandy agrees to increase the deposit for
amendments.
Well, there's one increased building consent amendment from 125 to 450, and then there's an introduction of a new deposit. So it's probably going to have to need two sentences.
Or if you're happy with what's proposed, you can just leave it as it is, rather than changing it at all.
Because it already says 4.9, yeah. So I think that can just stay.
Oh, you mean to take out the by CPI 4.9%, because that's all we're doing anyway for the building stuff, except for those deposit stuff. Right.
Yeah.
That would work.
I couldn't see where that was already in there, so it's 5. I see, rather than that 75%.
I think the 4.9% increase of CPI achieves that 75%.
Okay.
Council costs with the Building Act fees. Is that right, Mandy? Just to clarify.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mandy, does that now therefore still require the statement of proposal?
So it doesn't require it under the Building Act, but we are proposing to do it because of those new charges and that increase in deposit.
Councillor Skinner, would you like for that put back in?
Yep, put that back in. Let's check number 13 there because we did remove out the consultation, but we'll still need some consultation where appropriate. Oh, yeah, got that in. Yep, very good.
Matt, I can see there's a question from you.
Yeah, so I'd like some commentary from the staff about the likely impact on services.
Sorry, the impact on which services resulting from what?
Well, if we're going to reduce the amount of money that's going towards, you know, making services operate, what will be the consequences of that? I'm warm to what I'm seeing on the screen, but I feel I need to ask on behalf of the public that if we go down this track, what will the consequences be in terms of what they see when it comes to services?
So through the chair, I might assist there. The services will still be delivered. The issue will be we won't meet our revenue and finance policy requirements. So you'll see that we'll be failing in terms of those measures.
And so that means a greater proportion of the costs are met by ratepayers rather than the people applying for consents.
So does that mean that this will require rate increases?
Yes.
The staff. Thank you, Kate, for your thoughts, but I'm asking the staff whether this is likely to require an increase in rates. There's no such thing as a free lunch. I'm just unpacking that.
So through the chair, we haven't done the numbers on that, so I can't answer that with a straight answer, Matt.
Okay, so we can support this, which I think is, you know, would be a popular thing for us to do, but we don't know what the consequences are likely to be in the medium term. Is that a fair assessment?
So I think this leaves us with a shortfall in the budget of about 150,000.
Okay. Thank you for that. It's good for the processing. Cheers.
Okay, are we ready to speak to it? Have we still got questions? Mayor Rachel, and then Mal, and then Tim.
Thank you. As long as the recommendation is now in order with all the consultation, I'm happy to second what Councillor Skinner is proposing. As long as officers are satisfied that they've got that in order, it's quite a bit of work to do for Robin. So I just maybe want to get it up on the screen just to be satisfied that Ms. Barton's happy with what we've got. And Mandy.
Yeah, so the main change, well, the only change from what I can see is that the resource consents hourly charge out rate is not increasing by what's proposed. It's proposed to increase by CPI, and for that to go out for consultation.
And the same with the Food Act too. And
yeah, that was always going to be CPI anyway.
Yeah. So we're okay with what.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Look, I'll speak very briefly in support of what is here. I think the worst case scenario that council can do is do, you know, significant price escalations and then not deliver actually and shorten up the timeframes. And I'm just not convinced that increasing hourly rate is going to do anything to improve the timeframes. And that's really, you know, if I was thinking about where we need to be spending our effort, it's actually, as I said, a much bigger system approach around that issue across multiple councils, and that might be something that we want to pick up as part of our regional council, unitary council sector role, because there's quite a lot of hours that go into processing consents that are around regional functions, and they have a public benefit to all. I think this is you know, a big issue for us to address as a sector, but I just can't sustain a 17% increase. That seems to me to not be getting to the heart of what the problem is.
Okay,
and
thanks.
I recognise there's a rating implication potentially, but maybe there's going to have to be some savings elsewhere in the council budgets to account for that. It's a future discussion to be had.
Thanks, Mayor Rachel. Tim, I assume you want to write a reply, so I'll go to Matt next and then back to you, Tim. Claire, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sorry, through the chair, I just wondered if it would be possible to note somewhere that we won't meet our revenue and financing policy in the resolution, please.
Yeah. Are you happy with that, Tim and Mayor Rachel? I think Tim's nodded.
Yeah, so you're saying you want a bit of commentary on that and a part of the resolution, is that what you're saying, or just want us to understand that?
So in the resolution, it notes that the resource consents team won't meet the revenue and financing policy.
I mean, it wasn't prior to. I'm just saying that it won't. That was the objective of the officer's recommendation, but it wasn't prior. So yeah, that needs to be for clarification. Yep.
Okay, Matt.
Thank you. I'm going to support this because I think if we put it to the people of Nelson today, they would want us to do this. We do live in some pretty testing times. I think people of Nelson would support us doing this. However, this does remind me of when we did the 0 rates increase during the first year of COVID. It was a well-received thing that we did, and it recognised the difficult times that people were going through, but it didn't fix the problem, and this won't fix the problem either. And the problem is council does not have enough tools to do the work that it needs to do, and we keep saying as a sector that the government needs to do more to help us, and we just have to double down on that. Because, and I've said this before, we need to put more energy into explaining the situation to the residents of Nelson Whakatū, the people of Nelson Whakatū, so they can support us in this. And I would be very interested in hearing from staff and other elected representatives whether you have any novel or ingenious ideas for ways that we could do this, because I don't think we're doing enough to actually put pressure on the government to give us more tools to do the work that they want us to do.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Tim, right of reply?
Thank you for that. And yes, fully understand why it was went out in the original recommendation. I've already debated on that, but the reason why I'm favourable of this, it already increasing it by 4.9%, so it helps go towards some of that shortcomings. But keep in mind, when we are increasing those hourly rates, etc., that was really covering a whole lot of costs, covering those services that we give out that you can't charge out for. So this will really help drive our sort of efficiencies. It's probably getting to more of a real world situation where you don't know how many products you're going to sell and setting a price point or so forth, if it's a service or a widget. And this is when we're talking about the costs that we need to recover. We don't know how many times we're going to go out to charge, etc. So it's really an estimate, and possibly a good estimate. So if you're overcharging for something or trying to gather too much of those costs, you may not have got some of those fees coming in at all. So it can work both ways. But I see this as a positive in the sense that we weren't reaching those targets prior. With a 4.9% increase, we'll be obviously closer to reaching those targets. It's not obviously reaching at 43% that was put in the recommendation by increasing by 17% those charges, but then they are worked out what we're envisaging, you could call a turnover or needing of our services. So it comes back down to, if we're wanting the city to move forward, we want to be able to encourage people to be able to come to us unburdened with being able to do consents, etc. And I think there is a good balance that we are getting closer to in regards to being a public good, and we'll be a ratepayer and those who want to seek consents. So once again, and I think the Madam Mayor covered it very well, when we're trying to regain those costs just through an hourly rate, I don't think that's a good lever to do it. And if nothing else comes out of it, this will highlight where we can create some efficiencies. We'll probably highlight to the public that we're doing what we can to level that out. But thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to put the vote all those in favour and all those against. If you can signal through the reactions button, tick in support, cross if you're against.
Through the chair, I added the recommendation with regards to the revenue and financing policy. Can I just please check that the mover and seconder were happy with that?
Yeah, if you can bring that up briefly, please.
The seconder's not overly happy with it, but will accept it because I kind of in Councillor Skinner's efficiency space and Councillor Laurie's conversation with government about the functions that are delegated down to councils. About time the conversation changed completely. I'll accept it today, but it really needs to be grappled with.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks everyone, that's carried, and we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think is confidential. So I need to move into confidential. Before we do, I need to check that everyone is in a space where they can't be heard. Perhaps
through the chair, the next item is the deliberations. Did you want to come back to that separately?
Through the chair, it might be good if we can get the public excluded matter dealt with first.
Yeah, because I need to leave by 4. I can't be here after 4, sorry. So yeah, I think we need to get the public excluded done first.
Okay.
So we'll move into public excluded and then we'll come back for deliberations. I'm happy to move that we move into public excluded. Mel seconded. Can I just check that everyone you will vote on that first? Yep. All those in favour? Great. Anyone against? No, we're moving into public excluded. And then if you just drop your reactions buttons and then just use the green tick to let me know that you're all in a space where you can't be heard.
Yep.
Great, thank you. And lower the reaction buttons, and we're in. Do we just need to turn the Zoom, the live streaming off, Robin?
Through the chair, could we just have a couple of minutes to transition, please?
Yep. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. 3:25. We'll be back.